Welcome, everyone, to vpod.ai.
Great to be here.
Okay, so let's dive deep into something pretty major that just unfolded in the Netherlands.
Yeah, a big political shakeup.
Exactly. We're talking about the collapse of their governing coalition. We've got some information here, and our plan is to really unpack it for you.
Figure out what happened, the why behind it, and maybe what comes next.
Right. Think of it as getting you quickly up to speed on this pretty significant development.
Absolutely. And looking at the details, the first thing that really jumps out is just how fast this all went down.
It really did. Tuesday, boom, the government collapses. A proper shockwave.
And the immediate cause, the catalyst, seems pretty clear. Geert Wilders.
A leader of the far-right Freedom Party, the PVV.
That's him. He decided to pull his party out of the coalition, and that was that.
And the Prime Minister, Dick Schoof, his reaction was instant.
Yep. Confirmed he was stepping down, went straight to the king, Willem-Alexander, offered the cabinet's resignation. Standard procedure, but still dramatic.
And his comments afterwards, in those televised remarks, pretty sharp language.
Oh, yeah. He called Wilders' move irresponsible and unnecessary. You could almost hear the exasperation. He said, as far as I'm concerned, this shouldn't have happened.
A very public dressing down. Meanwhile, Wilders posts on X basically just, no signature for our asylum plans. EVV leaves the coalition. Very blunt.
Very blunt. And then you immediately got this wave of, well, shock and anger from the other parties in the coalition.
They seemed blindsided. Or maybe just furious.
A bit of both, perhaps. They were pointing out that some of the things Wilders was demanding weren't actually that far off policies already being discussed or even in the agreement they signed.
So they were saying we weren't blocking everything he wanted.
Exactly. Which makes the speed of it all even more striking.
You mentioned Schoof tried a last-minute appeal that morning.
Yeah, apparently tried to salvage things.
Right.
But the meeting, the final one, it lasted just 1 minute.
1 minute. Seriously.
60 seconds, Wilders just walked out. Tells you everything about the trust level, doesn't it?
Wow. Okay, so if it wasn't a complete deadlock on all his demands, what was the actual final straw? It sounds like migration was the real flashpoint.
That's the core issue, yeah. A big row specifically over migration policy. Wilders apparently pushed for 10 additional asylum measures.
10 specific points, above and beyond what they'd already talked about.
That's the picture painted here. Things like a complete freeze on processing new asylum applications.
Well, told us stuff.
That seems to be the demand. Also, halting construction of new reception centers.
Which are probably needed, right?
Likely desperately needed. And also, crucially, putting tight limits on family reunification for people already granted asylum.
Those are pretty significant demands, especially to drop on a coalition that was, well, struggling anyway.
Definitely. And remember, this government had only been around since July 2024, less than a year.
It barely got its feet under the table.
Right. And it was always seen as an uneasy alliance. People called it a marriage of convenience.
Suggests it was maybe doomed from the start.
Well, it was certainly characterized by a lot of infighting. They struggled to actually get much done, push through major policies. It was formed because the election results were fragmented, not because they all, agreed on everything.
So who were the players in this fragile setup?
Okay, so you had Wilders' PVV, the largest party, then the VVD, Conservative Liberal.
The party of the previous Prime Minister, Rutte.
That's right. Then the Farmer Citizen Movement, the BBB, relatively new, focused on rural issues. And the New Social Contract, NSC, sort of centrist, led by Peter Omtzigt.
So, quite a mix. Far-right, center-right, centrist, and a protest party. Trying to agree on something as sensitive as migration. Yeah, I can see the difficulty.
It was always going to be tough. And like those other leaders said, it wasn't that nothing was happening on migration. Some of Wilders' broader goals were in the coalition agreement.
But these specific 10 demands were the sticking point.
It seems so, especially things like the application freeze. Apparently those had been discussed before and dismissed.
Like dismissed. Just political disagreement.
Well, that too, probably. But a major factor mentioned is legality. Concerns about whether these measures would even hold up under Dutch law or international law.
Ah, okay. So it wasn't just, we don't want to do this. It was potentially, we can't legally do this.
That adds another layer, definitely, which makes the reaction from his former partners even more pointed. They weren't holding back.
No kidding. They basically accused him of blowing the whole thing up on purpose.
Pretty much. Engineering the crisis, they called it.
Yeah, Dylan Yasilgos, the VVD leader, called it super irresponsible. But she also added, this wasn't about asylum at all, suggesting another motive.
Right. And Mona Kaiser from the BBB, the deputy PM, was even sharper.
What did she say?
I think Wilders is betraying the Netherlands.
Betraying the Netherlands. Wow. That's about as strong as political language gets.
It really is. Shows the depth of the anger and, well, betrayal they felt.
So amid all this flack, what's Wilder's take? He doesn't seem bothered. The material suggests he feels, what, empowered?
Emboldened seems to be the word used. He told reporters straight up he wants to be prime minister.
Making no secret of his ambition.
None at all. And he wants the PVV to come out of the next election bigger than ever. It sounds less like a failure and more like maybe a calculated step towards that goal.
Which ties into that analysis mentioned from Army de Van Riege at Chatham House.
Right. She suggested maybe Wilders wanted this collapse because PVV support was dipping a bit in the polls recently.
So force an election now on your key issue to regain momentum.
That's the theory. If things were getting tough inside the coalition, maybe triggering a fight on his home turf asylum is seen as a way to rally his base and turn those poll numbers around. It's a political gamble, for sure.
A high-stakes one. Okay, so where does this leave things right now, practically speaking?
Well, Scoot's government stays on, but only in a caretaker role.
Meaning
They handle day-to-day business, keep things running, but don't make big new policy decisions. Just manage things until a new government is formed.
and that NATO summit is coming up soon in The Hague, right?
End of the month. So having someone formally in charge, even caretakers, is pretty crucial for hosting that.
And what about the economy? Did this political bomb cause immediate financial jitters?
Interestingly, perhaps not as much as you might expect. Sandra Flippen, chief economist at ABN AMRO, had a pretty stark take. She said the immediate economic impact looks minimal. Why? Because the coalition had barely made any concrete plans in its 11 months anyway.
Ouch. So not much policy momentum to disrupt because there wasn't much momentum in the first place.
Kind of an ironic side effect of all the infighting, yeah. It highlights how difficult that coalition found it to actually govern.
So looking forward, elections seem inevitable, likely this autumn.
That's the general expectation, and the political landscape looks messy.
How so?
The polls mentioned suggest the far right, Wilders bloc, and the Green Left parties are running neck and neck.
So potentially a very polarized result.
Could be very competitive, very fragmented again, perhaps. And you see this pattern elsewhere too, don't you?
Definitely. Migration, cost of living.
Yeah.
These issues are causing political turbulence all across Europe.
Yeah, the Dutch situation, while specific, kind of reflects those wider pressures. It's not happening in a vacuum.
But for Wilders, even if the PVV does well, becoming prime minister isn't automatic, is it? The Dutch system needs a coalition majority.
Exactly. He needs partners, needs to get to 76 seats in the 150-seat parliament. And that might be his biggest hurdle.
Because he just walked out on his last set of partners.
Precisely. His move is being called reckless. There's this perception, fair or not, that he put personal ambition or party politics above stability.
Which could make potential future partners very wary.
You'd think so. Parties that were hesitant before might find joining a Wilders-led coalition even less attractive now. Trust is a big factor in these negotiations.
So his likely campaign strategy, focus hard on asylum.
Almost certainly. Frame the election around that issue, the one he used to bring down the government. It's his core message.
But there's a potential snag with that strategy, isn't there? A point raised in the analysis.
A really crucial one, yes. For nearly a year, his party, the PVV, held the government portfolio responsible for asylum and immigration.
So they were in the driver's seat on this issue.
They were part of the team responsible, so the argument could be made. If this was your top priority and you held the relevant post, why couldn't you make progress within the government? Why did it still collapse over this?
It could be a difficult question for him on the campaign trail.
It could. It means, as the analysis notes, there are no guarantees that such a gamble will pay off. Voters might wonder why he needed to break things to achieve goals he arguably had some power to influence already.
A really sharp point. It adds complexity to his narrative.
Definitely does.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this deep dive up. Key takeaways. The Dutch government falls quickly, triggered by Wilders over migration demands.
Leading to accusations he deliberately engineered the crisis, possibly linked to polling and his own ambition.
Now we're looking at likely autumn elections, a volatile political scene, reflecting broader European tensions around migration and cost of living.
And a big question mark over whether Wilders can build the necessary coalition, given how this one ended, even as party performs well.
That seems to cover the main points, which leaves us, and you, the listener, with something to think about.
Yeah, consider these coalition governments, especially the marriages of convenience. How inherently unstable are they when faced with really divisive issues like migration?
It makes you wonder what this specific collapse tells us about governing in today's polarized world. Not just in the Netherlands, but maybe across Europe or even more broadly. How do you find common ground when the gap seems so wide?
A tough question, and one we'll likely see playing out in many places. It's certainly something to keep an eye on.